Thanks everyone for coming and listening tonight. I would like to acknowledge that I'm a visitor here from the ancestral and unceded territory of Mi'kmaq. And while I was in Vancouver this summer for a group exhibition, one of my classmates who is from Hawaii offered a blessing to our exhibition space, and he was very generous in sharing his culture and traditions, and that in Hawaii, even before you would enter the space, you ask permission to enter the space and for protection, and you offer a blessing and a gift to give thanks. So I think about that a lot in my daily life now. So I'd also like to acknowledge this room that we're in, and this beautifully restored heritage building, and the air and the ideas that we're sharing and participating in tonight. I really want to thank everyone at the Axe for having me. It has been just a joy to have my work here. The whole team has been just so friendly and welcoming and professional, and I just want to say thanks for having me. I'd also like to thank Arts and Bee and Canada Council for supporting the creation of this work. I have been a visual artist for more than 30 years in New Brunswick, and it is not easy to make a living as an artist living here. And it's really integral for these funding bodies in the creation of new work and new ideas and new ways of thinking. And I'm very grateful for the support of my practice. This exhibition marks a new direction for my work that I'm very excited to share. I just want to go back a little bit and provide some context in how I began incorporating textiles into my work. Most people are probably more familiar with my work as a painter. And that really begins with this painting, which is called Busy Woman from 2008. I began working on a series that I call Busy Woman, which was really about my own experience as a young mother, trying to be a working mom and maintaining my art practice, and couldn't always get to my painting studio. I didn't know any other female artists that had young children at the time, and I was just sort of finding my way as I went along. I had a lot of frustrations around the expectations that are placed on women who are working and who are mothers. And the way I understand myself in the world is to figure that out by creating artwork. So around this time, I started rug hooking because I couldn't always get to my painting studio as much as I wanted to, and I went into a yarn shop and was just struck by the bright colors of this wall of yarn, and just felt drawn to it. I think I needed more of a creative outlet at the time. So I bought basically my palette, my paint palette of colors, and a piece of burlap, and went home and made a small piece of sunflowers, which I brought. This is my first ever hooked rug that I made. And I have it on the chair of my computer desk at home, which is why it's flat, because I sit on it for quite a few years. But in making this at home, I realized that the imagery in my paintings translated really well to the rug hooking. In the paintings, I was taking drawings and simplifying them down to basic outlines in positive, negative space, and making handmade stencils and using rollers and tape and spray paint, and realized that I could start doing that with the rugs as well. So this one is called Action Figures, and it goes back to the idea that working mothers are superheroes in order to get through the day, and every superhero needs an action figure. So I just worked at home, rug hooking, teaching myself, how to achieve the same color and texture in wool that I could in paint. In paint, I can mix any color. And in wool, I have to have all the different colors cut and prepared, so I'm grabbing them quickly as I'm working. It's a different way of thinking and working, but I worked with having young children because the composition is planned and the colors were planned, so I could work on it a few minutes at a time. And I worked on it at home, basically took over the dining room, and if I had an hour, I hooked. If I had 5 minutes, I hooked. I hooked cooking supper, and that's just how I did it. I was really drawn to the softness and the fibers, and feeling part of a tradition of women using traditional craft techniques associated with women's work. In 2015, my grandmother passed away, and I found myself overcome with grief. She was 104 and had been a huge influence on me in my life. We had spent a lot of time together, traveled together, and even though I was a grown woman with my own family, I couldn't imagine life without her. She was pretty amazing. She led an incredible life. She became a medical doctor in the early 1900s and was really ahead of her time, and stayed active and opinionated and right up for her whole life. To deal with the grief, I decided to rug hook a series of rugs based on the stories of her life. This is her at 28. It's her engagement photo taken in her parents' garden. She had just finished medical school and was about to marry and move to Nova Scotia. I did a lot of writing, trying to remember the important stories and figuring out how to create those in visual form. I wanted to highlight her story, but also present it in a universal, in a way that was universally understood and felt, about women and maternal figures and lineage. And I was thinking about generations of women and how knowledge and wisdom are passed down at home through generations of women and families. I should say also at the same time, my mom had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I was worried if I didn't preserve these stories that I would start to forget. I made hundreds of painted studies in preparation for this project. This is many of the works on paper, which most of them did not make it into the final project, but I used them as studies for color and composition, and sometimes copying them exactly and sometimes just using part of it. This one's called Mothers and Daughters. Making this work was very personal to me. It really was me alone at home for hours and hours, feeling the yarn and thinking through thoughts and memories as a way to deal with grief. I never really thought I would share it. I thought this was a private project. I had never shown hooked rugs as part of my art practice, despite having many exhibitions every year with paintings. I thought I was keeping this for myself. And then I realized that it was important to really share her story and women's stories, and that I wanted to hear more women's stories, and that people could relate to them and then in the images see their own story reflected back at them. It was the first time I used text in my work, and I spent a lot of time with the words from the eulogy that I had written for my grandma. And again, in the same way I did with drawings, really simplifying words and ideas down to distill the most basic thought and form. This is Grandma at age 60. She rewrote her medical exams at age 60 to practice medicine again after raising 6 children, one of whom is here. This is the way I remember her. She dyed her hair black and twisted it on top of her head until she was about 95. She never seemed to age. And every morning she did a Jane Fonda workout video in the living room. So whenever I was visiting, I would wake up to the sound of that 80s aerobics music, and Grandma would be dancing in the living room. So this is an example of when the rug matched the painting exactly. The series that I called Becoming was shown for the first time at the Beaverbrook Art Gallery in 2018. It's hung in a grid formation to represent a story quilt, or the telling of a life story. This series has now been shown 5 times across New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, ending last year at the Hook Drug Museum in Hubbards, Nova Scotia. It's by far the most important body of work that I have made so far. And the experience of sharing it and showing it and hearing feedback, I learned a lot about myself, and that even though this is very personal to me, people can see themselves in it, and that was really formative for me as an artist. This is in 2019 at Sunbury Shores Arts and Nature Centre. And the red tulip that repeats itself in my work is really a representative of my grandma and the garden that my grandparents had at their cottage where I spent my summers as a child. During the 5 years of making the work and then the 5 years of showing it, my mom's Alzheimer's had really taken hold, and I essentially lost the 2 most important women in my life at the same time, just in very different ways. The sadness around my mom's disease was long and it was heavy. And I carried that into new work about weaving. I became fascinated with the idea of weaving and the idea of making cloth and this ancient knowledge of making cloth, and the idea of slowing down even more. Because I paint very quickly, I paint on the floor, it's kind of like a frantic energy type of thing. And rug cooking slowed me down a little bit, and weaving is even slower than that. But I relate the threads in weaving to threads of memory, and there's all these connections, and then sometimes there's a break or a failure to connect. So I've been weaving for about 10 years now. I've learned from Leslie Armstrong down in Lunenburg, going down there every summer. And Leslie is a master weaver, weaves exquisite yardage of fabric for suiting and, in natural fibers. It's perfection. And I've always believed that you should learn how to do something properly before you start breaking the rules. So she's a very generous teacher, taught me how to do it correctly, and then allowed me to, bring in my crazy colors. And this is one of the first weavings that I made, and I'm sure she was like, "What is that?" I really am drawn to tapestry weaving because there's a pictorial element. So these ones our tapestry woven with an embroidered drawing, again trying to carry the same imagery over into another medium. So these two pieces on the wall here I made when my mom passed away. I call them assemblage pieces. They incorporate acrylic painting, oil painting, tapestry weaving, woven strips of canvas, soft sculpture, and embroidery. When I look at them now, it's as if I was trying to compartmentalize grief. They're finished works, but with separate components. The soft pockets on the right-hand side are taken from knitted hats made by my mom. My mom was an expert knitter, and as her Alzheimer's progressed, couldn't follow a pattern, but her hands held the memory of how to knit a simple hat. So for a little while, if we started a hat in the morning, she could sit and finish the hat, and it was calming and familiar to her. So I have a box of these white hats that represent that time. So I was just playing with them in the studio. I was tracing them and shaping them, and then sewed them together and stuffed them with the remnants of my rug hooking, and they kind of form breast shapes. And that's the first time I used a sculptural element in a painting. These works led me to wanting to explore further how to incorporate weaving deeper into my painting practice, and ultimately an examination of many traditional textile techniques I associate with my mom and her mother. They both smocked dresses for their children, and as a child, I wore the dresses, as did my children. And my mom sewed all our clothes and knit all our sweaters, and her mom did embroidery. So how can I revisit these traditional techniques and bring them into contemporary practice? This is an example of a painting that's quilted. So it was sewn, stuffed, and then painted. And I don't usually have a plan when I start a painting. I just let the process guide me. This one's called Time Traveler, and it started with the weaving, a painting on a weaving, and then sewed, and it incorporates a piece of vintage fabric that matches a dress that my mom used to have. And this is another quilted piece. The piece on the right, Motherhood, is about getting away from the hard edge of the painting stretcher and bringing in more softness. All this work deals with my relationship with my mother as a daughter, but also the relationship with my own two children as a mother, and the generations of women in my family, and how knowledge and wisdom are passed through generations. In 2021, I had a retrospective survey exhibition showing 30 years of my work at the Owens Art Gallery in Sackville. It was curated by 3E Collective and coincided with the publishing of my book, Everything in Between, which was also written by 3E Collective. The title, Everything in Between, relates back to weaving and the hidden spaces between the threads, which to me is a metaphor for life. It's not always a straight path, but what happens along the way. The experience of this show happened the same year my mom passed away, and the same year my youngest child left for university. So everything I thought I knew about being a mom and a daughter and an artist shifted. It was really quite overwhelming to have 30 years of my work in one gallery at this emotionally charged time. But it was also very rewarding and very interesting to work with 3 curators and see how they interpreted my work and chose to display it. So I went back to school. I started school last September. I'm working on my Master of Fine Arts through Emily Carr, University of Art and Design in Vancouver. And I started school wanting to study and experiment traditional techniques I associate with my mom and grandma, and to integrate those into my painting practice. My research investigates alternative ways of knowing and learning and incorporates traditional craft techniques into my contemporary painting practice as a bodily form of memory reaffirming matrilineal connections through making. I found that smocking seemed to capture all the elements and ideas that I was searching for, and worked through many iterations of painting and stitching, taking the stitching out, painting again, beginning with the grid pattern but not following the pattern, and working through many layers of painting and stitching and exploring the weight of the canvas and how much paint I could get on. Some of these pieces represent that. Before there was too much paint that I could actually not get a needle through it anymore, and they represent abstract bodies existing and moving through space. This small piece, Swaddle, was really a breakthrough for me. The title comes from the wrapping of the canvas, giving the illusion of gently protecting whatever is inside. The blanket metaphor fills the piece with thoughts of softness and care, whether from the perspective of memory of childhood or as a parent. It invokes maternal feelings of responsibility, worry, and fear. The painted grid is visible on the exterior. It's about the size of an infant, and the wrapping extends to the idea of swaddling and cradling. It speaks to loss, care, motherhood, and the grief of motherhood when children leave the home. These are some more iterations of weaving, using knitted tubes and painted strips of canvas. My sculptural paintings are built through labor-intensive processes, layers, and repetitive motions learned from years of painting and skills practiced at home. My practice is informed by these alternative ways of knowing and of making, a knowledge passed down through creative lineage that integrates many layers of personal and material relationships. And a lot of my work throughout my practice has been about translating between mediums, going back to even the rugs and the paintings. So now I'm taking that further between 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. So this is a painting of my knitted forms. And then these 2 that are here on the wall. How does a weaving become vocabulary for painting? Life form represents an abstracted view of a body evolving, moving, changing, and aging through space, time, and field. The thought process behind my work addresses ideas between the tangible and intangible, the real and the unreal. My inquiry explores the space in between phases, spaces, time. I find myself questioning the space between caring and being cared for, between joy and sadness, between youth and aging. While articulating and responding to my experience as a woman, mother, and daughter, my textile manipulations manifest an abstract representation and embodiment of the emotion of motherhood. This one is also about aging physical bodies. That's some work in progress. That's my studio in Sackville. Life raft symbolizes for me a soft place to land, a raft that doesn't float. After many iterations, it has come to rest on the wall, with woven strings across the soft, stuffed forms, acting as drawing on the surface or the skin. And this one started by painting a large piece of unstretched canvas, unprimed canvas with thinned down paint, and cutting it up and sewing it and then weaving it back together on a tapestry loom. These were made this summer in Vancouver. I'm thinking about softness, pillows, blankets, mattresses, beds, as well as knots, connections, grids, space, form, weight, and color. The one on the right is called Weighted Blanket, and I painted a large piece of unprimed, unstretched canvas, about 5 by 10 feet, and sewed it and stuffed it into cascading rolls. It's life-size and references a bed you can't actually lie down in. Comfort, that would be uncomfortable. And I'd like to end with this quote by the feminist philosopher Sarah Ahmed when she writes about bell hooks. To write us how she spills out, spills over, the intensity of sorrow, filling it up, stuffing it where she can, where she is, the places she has, under the bed, in the pillowcases, among her underwear, under, in, among, hidden with her delicates, her other things, in putting her writing there, her thoughts and feelings tumbling out, what she hears, bits and pieces of conversations. She exceeds the space she has been given, the concern she is supposed to have, the corners and the edges of the room. I feel as though my research is an attempt to manifest this idea of expansiveness, and I find freedom in the idea of exceeding the space that you have been given. Thank you. I'm very happy to answer any questions also.
So many questions I'd like to ask.
Yeah? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I mean, when all this created, when did it start?
As a child,
Okay.
yeah, very young. Yeah.
And even going through school? Like, I'm trying to remember, but...
This is my junior high French teacher. Yeah, I would go home after school and draw and paint. That's what I did. Yeah.
Because I can't remember, like, I'm trying to remember, it's true that it was 7, 8, 9, I mean, grade 7, 8, 9.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, and my memory fails me of the, yeah, I didn't notice that, I guess.
I was very quiet and shy
Yes,
at
you
school.
were. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would go sketching with my aunt
Yeah.
in the summers. That's what we would do together. So. Yeah.
You talked about family members with influence so profoundly. Are there artists that have influenced you? Other artists?
Yeah, well, I'm researching so much about artists now because I'm writing a thesis. So, yeah, I mean, growing up in New Brunswick, I always really admired Mary Pratt because she was a woman and she uses bright colors and she painted domestic spaces. So I've always really thought very highly of Mary Pratt's work. She made it seem possible to become an artist. Louise Bourgeois is an artist I look at a lot. Sheila Hicks, who does large textile installations. I mean, yeah, there's so many. I could go on forever, I think. Yeah.
Are the girls, are they artistic, or are they following your footsteps at all, or not?
Well, they both are because that's what we did at home growing up. They were always drawing and painting. My elder daughter just graduated from fine arts, actually, so has a fine arts degree. She's starting a master's of folklore in Newfoundland this fall. And my younger one is studying arts and wants to go into library science, but in sort of a curating, collecting kind of way. So, yeah.
So how do you see your role as an inspiration for others?
Oh, I just do what I do. I don't really think about it that way, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah?
What sparked you to go back to school?
Really, that year when I've always wanted to go back to school and didn't feel like I had the time or the freedom to devote to it, but the year I had that big exhibition, seeing my work all together in that room, and then my mom passing away and my youngest child leaving home, I just sort of thought, how will I navigate the next few years? And I wanted to go back to school.
Do you think you and your eldest will do collaboration?
I don't know. I mean, I think I was the embarrassing mom for quite a while, so, but maybe someday. I don't know. Yep.
What is your dream? It's not a secret.
What's that?
What's your dream?
My dream. I mean, I don't know. Someone asked me this recently. How do I define success? And like just being able to be in my studio every day. That's pretty dreamy to me. That's where I'm happiest. That's where I feel most like myself. So, I guess I'm already living it.